What's up, YouTuber and Redditors? It's me, Namejamie, and today I wanted to walk through a cohesive argument on why I believe Revenants should be changed based on their current implementation. I've seen a lot of Reddit posts surrounding this issue, as well as some YouTube videos in recent times, and I sort of want to put together all the best points and arguments I could think of as to why these things should be changed. And this is based on the things I've read, as well as my experience buying protection and my opinion as a lifelong PVMer and OSRS. So when I originally thought of this video, I thought it'd be cool to put together a bunch of snappy animations to sort of explain this to people. But in terms of actually getting people to discuss the actual topic and understand it, I thought it would actually just be easiest to go over my notepad and go point by point to actually understand everything I'm saying, okay? So let's start with argument one, okay? Argument one states that Revenants break the PVM cycle, okay? What I mean by this is that there's sort of a tacit or unspoken rule when it comes to PVM, and that is that the higher barrier to entry, the higher reward you should receive, okay? This comes in three major forms: stat requirements, quest requirements, and capital requirements, okay? Those are the three barriers, okay? And so to think of this in the abstract, all right, let's first look at cows, okay? Cows give less GP per hour than almost anything else in the game. Why? Because they have unbelievably low stat requirements, no quest requirements, and basically no capital requirements. You move a little bit up to the chain and you find blood valves. Higher stat requirements, still no quest requirements, a little bit bigger capital requirements, so better GP per hour. You keep fast forwarding this all the way to the end, you look at something like demonic gorillas, very high stat requirements, very high quest requirements, and pretty high capital requirements, and thus they net a lot more GP than a lot of things in game, right? So you have this paradigm, okay? And you look at where Revenants fit into this paradigm, right? Revenants have no quest requirements. Kind of weird for a boss that or a creature that has a 5 mil per hour profit margin, but okay. They have little stat requirements. You really only need 85 range to kill Revenants, so very weird. And they essentially have little to no capital requirements, because all you really need is a crossbow because of how overpowered it is in the wilderness, okay? So you have something that already doesn't seem to fit within this paradigm, and that's very weird, okay? So to reinforce this idea and sort of analyze it in more context, let's look at the late game bosses of RuneScape, right? You have Zulrah, a mid to late game boss that nets you 3 mil per hour if you're very good at the boss, right? That makes sense. Mid to late game boss, 3 mil per hour. Capital requirements in terms of gear, 30 to 100 mil. Pretty decent. Regicide as a quest completion. Okay, so it's got some quest completion in there. And 85 plus mage and range usually, and probably like 60 plus prayer. Okay, fairly decent requirements. You go over to Vorkath, another mid, I'd say more late game boss than Zulrah, but we'll say mid to late game. 3 mil per hour. 100 to 150 mil in gear requirements depending on whether you're ranging or meleeing it. Elite Void. Dragon Slayer 2 is a quest requirement, and 90 plus combat, either it's going to be range and defense or all your melee stats depending on what version you're attacking Vorkath with. So very high requirements, okay? Again, let's go over to Revenants, right, so we can see this in perspective to the other things in OSRS. 5 mil per hour Scald, okay? This is something that I've tested for 40 to 50 plus hours, okay? And this was the rate I was getting. So this is a pretty accurate rate, we could say, okay? 8 to 12 mil. I was generous and gave it 8 to 12 mil. Really? Because you're going to be sculling up. All you're going to bring for items that are worth anything is a crossbow. And you're going to be protecting that risk anyways. But let's say the crossbow in recent times has cost 8 mil. So we'll say 8 to 12 mil to be generous in the capital requirements. No quest requirements, and 85 range. I'm going to go through and show you one of these things isn't like the other, and it's fundamentally game breaking to the PVM cycle, okay, that we all hold pretty pretty high standards if you're a PVMer, okay? So we should continue on to argument 2, because argument 2 can break argument 1, but Revenants don't even follow argument 2, okay? And argument 2 is that Revenants take no skill, okay? There's another tacit understanding in OSRS PVM that if something violates argument number 1, it doesn't have high stat requirements, high quest requirements, or high capital requirements, it must require a lot of skill, and in that way, if it does, it can give out good rewards, okay? A great example of this would be a recent achievement by Exact, okay? You look, he got a level 40 Inferno Cape, okay? The Inferno Cape doesn't give you monetary compensation, but it gives you a best in slot item, a very good reward, okay? He got this at level 40, so clearly not very high stat requirements. I'm almost positive you don't need any quest to access the Inferno, although I could be slightly wrong there, but very little quest requirements, we'll say. And I'm pretty sure last time I looked at his gear, it was, I think, sub 50 mil, but I could be wrong. I want to say sub 25 mil, but I don't think it was that much because he didn't even have the stats to access the good gear in the game, which would cost a lot of money. But I'm pretty sure he didn't expend that much in capital. But still, he got one of the best in slot gear items for main accounts. Why is his reward so high? Because the Inferno takes so much skill. It makes sense. We compensate reward based on skill if argument number 1 has been violated, okay? And so to put this in perspective, right? Zorro, which follows argument number 1, is a medium to hard skill requirement. So it also adds to the fact that it rewards you at 3 mil per hour. Vorkath, same thing. Raids 1, medium, I'd say more to the harder end though, 4 to 6 mil, so it makes sense. Raids 2, hard to very hard, 6 to 8 mil. And again, we went over the Infernos, which gives you the best in slot item, but that's probably the hardest piece of content, right? So in addition to rule number 1, we have rule number 2. And these rules usually work together in some form, or rule number 2 overrides rule number 1. Really depends on the situation. But then we go down to Revenants. In terms of difficulty, I listed it at. You could do the Revs blindfolded. If you died to the Revs in terms of difficulty, I would say you might want to uninstall the game. That's the difficulty level I would put Revs at. What's the amount of money that Revs nets you? Again, 5 mil per hour. That's going to put it in right around Raids 1 difficulty, which again, we listed as hard. Again, we have something that's not fitting in with the rest of the arguments. Kind of weird. So let's go into argument number 3. Revs break their own rule for existence, right? Revs break the high risk, high reward sentiment that we were promised with them, okay? So what do I mean by Revs break their own justification? What I mean by this is that we were promised that the wilderness is dangerous, okay? That because you are risking things and because you are at risk of dying, you won't be able to achieve these high rates of nonstop PVM. Thus, we have to make the incentives or the drop table on Revenants very high to make it worth it for PVMers to go there, okay? When you pay for protection, you fundamentally throw away this entire top sentiment. It doesn't happen anymore because people can nonstop kill the Revenants with 0 risk, even with skulls, because all they have to do is protect their crossbow. That's it. So this entire justification for the way Revenants were implemented has been voided. And voided completely, okay? So not only do you have something breaking all the fundamental rules of PVM in terms of implementation, but it doesn't even listen to its own implementation justification, okay? So again, very troubling and probably warrants to be looked at, okay? We go on to argument number 4. There is not anything anyone can do to curb the risk that's not going on, or the lack of risk, I should say, right? There's nothing that anyone can do to add or recreate the high risk, high reward sentiment. And here's why, okay? These clans, okay, are mostly people who are RWTing or no-lifing, right? Usually those things are the same thing, but we could put them as separate categories, okay? And that's gonna put a hard time constraint argument in place, okay? And what I mean by this is that people play this game who are RWTing for a living. They clock in at 9, they go home at 5, and often really much more than that. They're probably playing 10 hours a day. Most of us have responsibilities. We can't put in 10-hour days. Even on the weekends, I can't put in 10-hour days. And I'm assuming 95% of the population to play RuneScape aren't putting in 10-hour days on average. Unless you're a streamer, a welfare benefit, or an RWTer, you're not putting in these types of hours. And because you can't compete with them on a strict time basis, you're never going to be able to put a dent in their mafia-esque organization, okay? Additionally, that's on top of this argument, there's an incentive issue, okay? When things are so profitable, like the protection that they offer, it is more profitable for clans to group up with them than it is to grieve them, okay? And this makes sense when we look at antitrust laws in the United States, okay? I'm an economist. This is the example that makes sense to me, right? In a market-driven system, it's more profitable to conglomerize than it is to compete. And that's why if you look at most industries over the last 50 years in the United States, they conglomerize. They merge together into bigger entities. Why? So they can access better economies of scale, better production, so on and so forth, right? They can move their price up higher, essentially creating monopolies. And that's oftentimes what these clans have on these worlds. They have monopolies, or a bunch of clans coming together to form monopolies, because it's just easier for them to collude together than to compete. A good example of this is that the protection program I paid for had you pay fines if you were caught breaking the rules that they laid out for you. And what they would do is they would send their friends or their rival PvP clans to come in and clear out the world and kill as many people as possible, and then they would send the screenshots of their loot over to the other clan that was protecting you, and if you violated any of their death rules, they would then fine you to make even more money, right? So they're colluding together to just extort the most amount of money out of players. It's absolutely absurd, okay? And a further incentive issue leads me to argument 5, right? Because there's a reaffirming behavior that actually increases the badness, or let me rephrase that. It increases how detrimental the incentive issue is, right? And what I mean by this is that RWTing innately causes bad behavior. Why is this? Is because you're tying your living to old school RS, right? This tying causes horrible behavior by definition, because these people who are running these clans are no longer playing a game. They're making a living. They're not clocking in to play a game. They're going to work, okay? If someone came to my work and inhibited me from making the most amount of money I could, you know what kind of behavior I would justify to make that stop? A lot. So likewise, you know what kind of behavior these RWTers are justifying in their discords? Ragging, harassment, hacking, doxing? Because you're not hurting their ability to play the game. You're hurting their ability to make a living, okay? So in their eyes, this is all justified, and it's because of this RWTing that you're tying these two things together and creating this innately toxic behavior that reaffirms the incentive structure. Because if I go in and I say I kill a few of their PVMers and I'm not told to, right? So I'm breaking up their protection. I'm going to get ragged. I'm going to get harassed. I may get hacked. I may get doxxed. So again, what does this lead to? If this is the consequence of breaking up their monopoly, why would I beat them when I can join them? And that again, so it's reaffirming the incentive issue that we had earlier. And so again, you have all these horrible things coming together. You have a monster that doesn't follow the Pvm rules. It breaks its own justification, right? You can't do anything to stop this paradigm. And on top of this paradigm is self-reaffirming. So literally you have the worst combination of arguments to put together so far, okay? Additionally, you can argument number 6. It hurts the economy, right? All this behavior could be curtailed, or we could say, or curbed, if Revenants followed the regular supply and demand functions of an ordinary PVM monster, okay? What I mean by this is that if a bunch of bots go to farm Zara, and this has happened, if you look at Zara on release, its prices were much higher. When bots learned how to do Zara, okay, the prices began to crash, okay? Because there's a more supply of those drops, and the prices tumbled as demand stayed the same, okay? Unlike those monsters, Revenant's drop table are highly linked to high alkables and to straight cash injections into the game, okay? Why this is bad is it means you can farm Revenants nonstop with no collapse in price, because the objects or the items you're getting from the monster can't go below their alchable price, which is already really high because you have a lot of rune and dragon items in there. And the uniques can't crash because no one demands the uniques. What you do with the uniques from Revenants is you bring them to an NPC who gives you straight cash for them. So again, we have a floor for these prices that they can't go below, and because of that, Revenants will always stay the same amount of money no matter how farmed they are, which is ridiculous, and the amount of cash being injected into the game is harmful for inflation, okay? Additionally, if you don't care about the economy of the main game, if you're an Iron Man, a lot of people have put forward the argument that allowing people to gain supplies this easily hurts the spirit of Iron Man. Personally, I'm unsure if this is actually a good point or true. I've seen it posted a lot on Reddit, and I've also read things from late game Iron Men who argue to the contrary. They say a lot of their late game Iron Man friends don't use the Revenant method because based on the regular trajectory of an Iron Man account, you actually don't need Revenants, and thus it's a waste of time because it's redundant supplies you're farming. I've heard other people say that even if that's true, it can move an account further ahead than it should be based on the amount of time you put in. Again, there are a lot of arguments here, and those are things to look at if you don't care about the first part of argument 6, but I'm personally unsure if those things are true, okay? So that's just one thing to look at, okay? And this leads us to the final argument I want to make, and this is again in response to things I've seen on Reddit, so much like argument 6, is the common idea on Reddit I've seen in opposition to changing the Revenants is that I thought we wanted to promote group content, and Revenants promote group content, therefore we shouldn't remove it, okay? And this is a bad argument for a lot of reasons, but I'll go over the main one in my opinion, okay? So this argument is premised on the idea that MMOs are for socializing, which I agree, okay? MMOs are for socializing. Yes, old school is an MMO. Therefore, we should promote group activity and socializing. That makes sense. So where is the disconnect in this argument, and where does it become a bad argument, okay? It becomes a bad argument when you consider at what costs group content should be implemented into the game, okay? So to get an understanding of what I mean, let's look at Raid 1 and Raid 2 content. If you go to the We Do Raids Discord, one of the biggest Discords I'm a part of that includes RuneScape as a main factor, it is a really healthy and good Discord. It's good group content. Why is that? It encourages socializing, it encourages teamwork, it encourages fun, it encourages all these things, okay? That's good stuff. But more importantly, they limit scamming, so it's very limited, and they curb the rest of the negative consequences it has on the rest of the game. That's good group content. You look at PVMing and PvP clans. Generally, they follow the same rule. You look at skilling and socializing clans. Generally, they follow the same rule. But the disconnect here again, can clans be overall bad? And the answer is clearly yes, okay? The case in point would be gambling clans, okay? We look here, gambling clans. If you remember back to the RS3 days, gambling clans were toxic AF, they were hella scammy, and they were involved in a ton of RWT. The cost-benefit analysis anyone would do on that is that they were providing much more negativity into the game than positive. And so, because of that, they should be removed. And I would argue that after looking at all the arguments, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which are just some of the arguments, right? It is clear doing a cost-benefit analysis that the Revenants in their clan protection offer far more negativity into the game than positivity. And because of that, we shouldn't enforce socializing and group content at the cost of all our other values. It's not a good idea because we can achieve, as we've seen here, through Raids 1, PVMing, PvP in clans, skilling, socializing clans, we can achieve group content without these negativities. And that's the type of group content we should strive for, okay? So now that we've gone over the problems, in my opinion, I think it's time to offer some solutions, okay? So solution number 1 I wrote down was to remove the Revenants from the game, full stop, okay? In my personal opinion, this is the best solution, and I'll explain why after going over the other examples, because it's easier to understand then. But this is just my personal opinion. I'm not that tied to any of the solutions specifically. It just, in my opinion, I think solution number 1 will do the most good for the game, okay? But before we go into that, let's go into solution number 2, okay? A common thing I see is to nerf the drop table. This is a very reasonable approach because it's something that we do for a lot of other monsters on release if we think they're overpowered or broken or facing similar problems that the Revenants are facing now, okay? So the general idea is maybe nerf them down to 1 mil per hour, and this will fix the RWTing issue. Why? Because if you're profiting less, there's less gold to sell, therefore you can't RWT as much. This would hurt clan profits because they wouldn't be able to charge as much if people were making less, and this would hurt clan activity because it just wouldn't be worth doing anymore, and overall we could curb some of this bad behavior / broken behavior we see in the game today. Now, the reason I'm not fully satisfied with this solution is that I would argue the Revenants are still inherently poor design in terms of monster and PVMing, okay? Also, additionally, depending on the rate you nerf the money down to, some clans, I think, will still find it profitable to act in this mafia-esque form, and because of that, you will still probably have some probably less, but some poor clan activity going on. So we still haven't fully fixed the problem we are trying to address here, okay? But I'm happy to admit this solution would be a little bit, if not a lot better than the current situation we have now, okay? So if this isn't a full solution, what's the third solution I'm proposing? This is the common Reddit solution I've seen so far. I also like to call this the idealistic fix because I think it's just that, highly idealistic. But it troubles me in a lot of different areas, and also I think it has some benefits, but we'll go over both those. But generally the idea of solution number 3 is that the Revenants would be taken out of the caves and would wander the wilderness freely, okay? And so the obvious positives with this are that it adds more content to the wilderness as a whole, okay? The reason this is that if you have PVMers running all over the entire wilderness to find Revenants, right, you have PvPers chasing them all over the wilderness, and thus you're probably going to have more spread out activity, which could be good for the wilderness. Additionally, you have more risk to the wilderness because a lot of people don't know this, or a lot of people do, but the Revenants, if you're not wearing the bracelet that protects you, okay, are hit unbelievably hard, okay? So if the Revenants, like all the other wilderness monsters, are inherently aggro and wandering around, and that you wander into one, it's going to be risky. So by letting them roam the whole wilderness, will add a lot of unsuspected risk to the wilderness, which is kind of nice because it plays into the values of the wilderness, which are risk and mystique and all these things. So that's another positive. Another positive is by spreading out the Revenants, you don't have to fix their drop table because without farming them continuously, the inherent profit PVMers are able to reap will be just less by default, okay? Which means you don't have to spend as much time reworking the drop table and applying all these nerfs. So again, that's a positive. The drawbacks I see here is that I'm not even sure this is mechanically possible from Jagex's point of view, okay? I understand that RuneScape in the past had a version of this, okay? So it theoretically should be possible from what I understand of the version they have, okay? I'm just not currently positive that the old school team can do it. That's something we'd have to discuss with them first. That's just the original drawback I thought about with this, is that I'm not even sure they've said that they can implement this correctly, okay? The second thing we have to ask is, not only can they implement it, but if they can they do it well? And on top of that, if they can't do it well, or they'd have to put a lot of work into doing it well, is it worth the dev time that they're going to put in, right? If you look at like other things, right? You look at the rework with the clan system or group Ironman. We've been asking for updates, some updates, for years, okay? They take a while, okay? Is this Revenant rework, where you're going to have a monster roam around the entire wilderness, something I don't think exists in the rest of Old School RS currently? if I'm not mistaken. I don't think there's any other monster that does that. Is that amount of work going to take so long that we'd have to wait years for it to be implemented? If so, maybe it's not worth the dev time, okay? And the third and final drawback I sort of ran into here is what I call the Bounty Hunter 3 problem, okay? And that is that if they rework it, okay, and it takes a decent amount of time, what we've fundamentally done is we've scrapped the ability to ever revert back, okay? And what I mean by this is, or what I mean by this can be seen by examining the Bounty Hunter situation, okay? You have Bounty Hunter 1 implemented, and a lot of people didn't like it, so they went to Bounty Hunter 2. Something a lot of people thought was inherently broken, should be reworked. And now we're on Bounty Hunter 3, something that a lot of people think is still broken and should be reworked, okay? So we have 3 iterations of an update, all broken, and all need to be still worked on and fixed, okay? So the problem becomes is, why don't you just scrap it? But why developers will likely never do this is because they've sunk all this time into developing an idea, and it's hard to throw away something you've sunk a bunch of time into. Whereas if you just scrap something before you rework it, well, no harm, no foul, because you put no time into it. So I'm afraid that if we go for this rework, a rework like this, and it doesn't work out for whatever reasons, implementation reasons, or there are unforeseen consequences that we didn't plan out, whatever it is, right? I doubt we'll ever be able to revert to solution number 1 because we'll have sunk and invested all this time into fixing it, okay? And that draws me to why solution number 1 is the best, okay? Why I think removing Revenants from the game is the best solution is that it will take no dev time, essentially. Again, not a developer, not a coder, not someone who works on engines, but if I had to take a guess, removing a monster from a game is far, far easier and takes a lot less time than putting a monster into the game, okay? So in terms of solutions, it reasonably should take little to no time, okay? Second reason I think it's the best solution is we know it will solve the problem, okay? Did any of these problems exist prior to Revenants existing? They didn't. I mean, scamming and RWTing did, of course. But scamming and RWTing relating to Revenants, did any of those things exist prior to Revenants existing? The answer is no. They couldn't have because Revenants didn't exist. So by removing Revenants from the game entirely, will Protections clans go away? They will. Will RWTing coming directly from Revenants disappear? Yes. Will the alchable and all the gold being injected into the game disappear directly? Yes. Will the horrible monster design that comes with the Revenants be disappear? Yes. All these things will inherently disappear if we just make the problem disappear. And the problem is Revenants, okay? So we know 100% full stop that solution 1 will solve the problem. There's no question if and or about it. All these things by definition will go away if the problem goes away, okay? Or what's causing the problem goes away. And that brings me to the final thing, which is something I touched on here, is that we will avoid another broken rework and the Bounty Hunter 3 problem with the investment of time, right? If we just full stop get rid of the Revenants, there'll be no investment of time, okay? And I would also argue it'd be easier to bring back the Revenants in a future update, which in a solution 3 type way, if we don't invest time into them now and just review and just get rid of them until we can sufficiently implement them in a solution 3 type way, okay? So that's why I think currently solution 1 is by far the most optimal solution we have, okay? And that's what I personally would preach for, but I understand people who are in between solution 1, 2, and 3, okay? I think they're all valid in their own regards, but again, I'm more focused on, I think what's more important is the arguments as to why we should be fixing the problem to begin with, right? And that's really why I made this video. So anyways, my YouTube will be down in the comments if you're watching this on Reddit. It would mean a lot to me if you could go like and subscribe over there, as I am trying to grow a channel. It would mean a lot. I do try and put a lot of work into these videos. But with that, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope it made you think a little bit. Remember, my name is Jamie, and I'll see you guys in the next one, all right? Peace.